Hey, what's up guys, it is RiceyAz here bringing you a VOD review from FNCS Week 1 just ahead of Week 2 as part of the series covering FNCS console and mobile. I understand that the background clip right now is of 3 Justin P and Trippy 3am, but that was because the actual PS4 footage from the stream was pretty low quality, so I've decided to use this just to hurt your eyes a little bit less, but please do brace yourself. I apologize for the quality, but I can't do much about it since they stream directly from the PS4s. Today we'll be VOD reviewing RiceyAz and KoinKoin, who placed 46th place with 6 points in FNCS EU Finals. We're going through what they did wrong, and we're going to learn from what they did wrong in order for you guys to not do that in your personal gameplay. Of course, there are some good things that they managed to do, and I'll also be highlighting a few things that I feel like is of high value that I haven't covered with you guys on a previous episode. They also land Lazy Lake, so that draws an interesting parallel as they split Lazy and just dip instead of what happened with Nut and Twexy, which is also the review that we did earlier this week, which is taking all of Lazy uncontested. They were contested by 2 different duos, Slays and I'm Noob and another console duo, and they chose to disengage and just take over other areas and trying to create a loot path. We'll be covering pros and cons of even having a loot path and improvising on the fly. There are 3 games where they died very early, and there are 2 games where we are going to cover today. We'll be contrasting the 2 games. One game they got 5 points and one they got 0, just outside of moving zones. We'll be talking about a little bit of what they did right, what they did wrong, what you should do in the scenarios that they are faced with, and perhaps this will help you in future in your gameplay as well. Now let's hop right into it. Here in this clip we see RiceyAz actually get tagged up slightly, and immediately, because this is quite an early game, the quality hasn't quite deteriorated yet. They're thinking about Storm Surge. What I feel they shouldn't have done was do exactly that, because that compromises a bit of their rotating time, and even if they spend a lot of time trying to get this llama, getting the loot up, and they actually get away with a lot by having that llama later on this game, by having cap materials, I feel like worrying about tags too early when you see right now it's 74 people, which means that they probably have Storm Surge. They probably won't have second zone Storm Surge in this game. Can really compromise your gameplay, and something that you guys need to also keep in mind when you're playing Storm Surge lobbies is how many people above the threshold there are in a particular moment in time, and how far away are you from the Storm Surge warning. And they decide to try and take this mountain earlier on in this game, but they actually find a duo up there, right? They spot the duo, they immediately try to disengage, and what happens is that they come down, they try to burn through the wood material in order to save themselves from getting tagged. They realize that the duo has a heavy sniper, and that immediately will compromise your gameplay if they manage to get sniped, which means that the whole game is just essentially griefed. What happens right now, he nades the opponent, try and apply some counter pressure. We'll touch on those 2 nades later on. They bear more significance than you think. But yeah, that's what happens. So he places a ton of walls, just trying to get away. He does it very consistently now, and he burns through all of his material, just trying to get away on this rotate, which I feel it was more than unnecessary, just trying to do that so far. So if we pull out Epipeng, we can see what they did wrong with the rotate. So we see the opponents right there at that dot. They have line of sight on you at that point. They can shoot at you. And what you did instead was run diagonally, right? So at every point there, you have to wall them off once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, however long that was, because you wanted to get from point A to point B at that rate. You got greedy, you tried to take the hypotenuse, and your opponent can pressure you at every single point, right? That's 20 materials on each of those dub-walls, and potentially 10. That's so many materials wasted just trying to get across. You see, you get depleted. You went from 500 to under 70. See, every time you need to wall them off consistently. Instead, you could have just gone in one direction, right? So if we picture that's the hill, that's the river underneath, and that's where you guys are right now. That's a tree, to just put it in reference, right? And if you guys wall them off once, maybe even twice, and you do one ramp and you do two ramps instead, that breaks line of sight immediately. You hear them talking about line of sight a lot in the gameplay, but that breaks line of sight. And that allows you to go into risky, refarm up, you see, that whole area breaks line of sight and allows you to refarm. That is so good for you because you want to make that rotation still, but you also don't want to go into endgame with a low amount of mats. So you refarm all of that, and you also break line of sight instead of having to travel diagonally, break into risky again if you want to refarm, and then going through all of that hassle just to have your game grief later on by storm surge, right? But regardless, even if we just consider in the moment right now, they're wasting a ton of resources just by building so much when it's just completely unnecessary. And you see, if they just took that route there instead of going completely to the left, they would have benefited so much. That was the right decision to make, which they didn't make. Because you see, look at how much distance that defense actually covers. It's kind of ridiculous. Right, so here's a scenario, right? It's mid game, they're trying to get tags, and what happens is that his teammate tells him to not shoot at them because they're the team with the heavy sniper. His teammate has a good job of identifying that they're the heavy sniper, and RiceyAz needs to stop shooting at them. What actually happens is that he opens a window, he takes a peek, he takes an edit, and RiceyAz can get heavy sniped by the team because that was the team. But I think from before, even if it wasn't, it's still a team with a heavy sniper that his teammate has identified. Something that's very underused is that if you're the person, say, making a slightly stupid play, and your teammate, instead of calming it to you, instead of saying, hey, don't do that, at the same time of just calming it to you, he should calm it to you, but then he should also reset at the same time. You should reset that wall in order to not draw attention to yourself, which is what a lot of top players do. I saw a really good example over the weekend of Andrew and Arkham doing it.
Just look out for that.
It's really useful, and you shooting a wall inside of your base won't draw nearly as much attention as you pressuring them and then them heavy sniping you. One thing that the team is constantly worried about is actually storm surge, right? If we look at it right now, there's 62 people left in the zone, and the zone's closing in, and next zone the storm surge threshold is actually 50. But they're doing all the right things in the wrong direction. First of all, they're tunnel visioning against this one team. There's a team on the mountain with a double heavy sniper, and so they've walled them off, and they've put a placed a cone inside of both of their boxes. And if you picture these two boxes as their base and the yellow dots as a potential base on the mountain, and we draw a base right now, we can see that by having that ramp placed towards the opponent, you instinctively want to pyramid peak towards them, right? You want to pyramid peak towards them, and once you get the info you want there, you kind of just stop. At least they did, right? Instead of looking in all of the other directions that you have the ability to look at still, you kind of just stopped. You grinded to a halt because you feel like your job is done there, and that those opportunities mid game are so important in these storm surge lobbies, right? If you get one dink, maybe a 44 dink with a blue AR at a far distance away, that can be the difference between you getting focused by the lobby and you needing to rush, and you just sitting in your base as per usual because you're above storm surge. And if we look at their positioning right now, they're not even looking in the right direction for storm surge, right? Sure, they might have looked that way slightly. That whole segment of the lobby is actually fairly congested because you have all of the people rotating in, right? If you didn't take the early rotate from Lazy Lake, that whole area is pretty free, and people will have to, perhaps follow the arrows that we just drew to rotate, and you'll have a pretty nice line of sight on them because you're on some elevation, and you should look in these directions if you want some storm surge tags that maybe on unsuspecting victims, and these victims won't really aggress back and feel desperate because their edge zone, they just got into zone, their shield should be fairly good, right? And so because of the hill, that whole direction that we just colored in, that whole direction is a big no-no. This area that we're drawing off right now, that direction you've already looked at, and so it should be a no-brainer. These are the directions that you've looked at. You've drawn that direction for yourself. By your positioning, you should be looking there for storm surge tags. They don't, they get punished. So continuing on with that story, the running storyline of Storm Surge inside of Game 2, we see, we fast forward in time a bit, they get gifted with Center Zone, and Storm Surge threshold actually kicks in, right? It's 55 people, so 5 people have to die if you know your thresholds, and they're currently 98 below. They're looking around, they're looking for potential nades being thrown at them, which is why they have a metal top, and they look at this player. This bit of play is correct, right? This player is getting focused by the server, and they're completely encapsulated with getting these tags on that player that they're actually not thinking about overpeaking, right? So that's a base. We assume that's a base because the people from there have freshly built brick and they went up. All of these circles are potential bases. Perhaps that last circle is a solo, but even if that solo isn't a base, that's still 5 bases who can potentially laser you, tag you up. You know, if they dink you twice and you're already on low damage, and that damage who dinked you is already the other contesting lowest damage team, you're completely screwed for Storm Surge, because then you can either fight people on a low amount of health and trying to get tags, or you're just a sitting duck there trying to heal and people tell you getting tagged up. You can even get sniped as well. What they do is they get a nice 22 tag on the player, but the player's already gone. Behind the line of sight, he's building, still 75 below. Right now, they're overpeaking once again, and they're looking in the same direction as the duo. That's not productive use of their time. And then he looks in the same direction that he looked in earlier. He looks at dead side of zone, which is also the wrong direction to look in. And then he notice how, you see, he's looked in that direction already, and then he's looked in that direction, which is that side, which is what we just pointed out just now. So that direction he should render useless. He should now be focusing his attention at least on the bridge or in the other area, because the people on the bridge need to rotate, right? The whole north side of the zone is pretty congested, right? Especially the bridge, because people who are more shambles, people who are playing edge, come into the bridge and they try to set up, and they just ignore that whole area. They don't actually look to the bridge for Storm Surge tags. They look in the same direction once again, and they come to the verdict that they should out heal Storm Surge. But they think it's a one person threshold, so they can out heal. But they don't realize that they're actually last place in Storm Surge. And since they're not actually getting much damage by healing from the start, other people's damage thresholds aren't exactly going up. And that was when they get slightly cautious about Storm Surge. They start panicking slightly, because they're getting hit and they're not even within zone, so they can't hold people outside of zone, and they can't even wait for an opportunity. They're not opening up any other direction apart from west. They're not looking east, they're not looking, so they're letting people in that whole direction have a free rotate. Because if we look at the map right now, if we look at the mini map, we see they've only looked in that direction. That's the only direction that they've even given slight attention to. So the people behind them can all rotate across without the literal established base center zone having give them any attention, any pressure. And they managed to get some tags here. They managed to go 11 above, and the problem here is that they stay content with 11 above, because there's 51 people left, right? And nobody's actually dying in this zone. And because of them being 11 above and being content and healing up, that compromises them. Because when they make the rotate, if the threshold goes up, if the threshold goes up, which it does, purple lightning starts coming down, you know, the very obnoxious purple lightning that the whole server can see. You've now got the whole server focusing on you, because you're running a low ground shambles rotate. And we see, if we assume all the airlines are just bases established, roughly the area where bases are established, you're running such a risk playing low ground that people around you can see you, people above you can see you, people rotating in can see you. They know, hey, they're shambles, we can focus that, because it's a one-man threshold and they're still getting tagged up. Right? They can tell, hey, they're passive players, let's push them out of their comfort zone. Or they're just bad players because they can't get Storm Surge and it's been so long. His teammate gets knocked due to one reason or another, and now he has a holdout against so many players. He gets RPG'd, and the whole server is just focusing him with minigun, etc. When he whiffs a shot, he has pressure from 3 different sides, and he just dies because of that. Now we're coming back to the bit earlier where they had that little skirmish on the mountain, and this bit was where I was telling you about the 3 nades that he actually had that he wasted, because when he uses 2 here, he depletes the last nade of any general use without them putting some risk on themselves, right? Because yeah, sure, if you're mid-ground, somebody's low-ground near you, you can get the server to focus them if there's a large explosion, if they use shield crack, etc. Well, these 2 nades achieve the same effect essentially as him just pressuring them with an AR. Because see, he can look at the ramp, right? And the chances of this team on the mountain just so happening to have one person suddenly all of a sudden run up the ramp once again is fairly unlikely. And therefore, even 1 nade would have been fine, because then he can stack with 2. But he chooses to use 2 nades to potentially go for the full kill here. You see that's 200 damage. When in fact the same effect would be achieved by an AR, because his effect is to pressure them off. Right? He was essentially going for the lottery here, because he could see that they weren't on the ramp. So he doing that was basically completely pointless and just grieves him for the rest of the game, instead of him having those 3 nades. And just now, earlier when we saw that brick base, that would have been perfect easy storm surge and kill. Here's a bit of game 4 during the mid game, and what happens right now that I'm not satisfied with is that he's not using his controller movement, right? Every time he's moving, he's shaking his entire screen around, so instead of running in one direction and looking in the other, in any direction at all, he's going full distance, he's turning his whole entire screen there, and therefore he compromises his movement, makes it easier for him to get lasered, and makes it easier for him to get sniped. So instead of, you see, moving in the long horizontal arrow that we see here and looking in the 2 other directions, he makes his movement easily predictable and easy to hit for damage, at least, if not cracked. And what happens is that he gets lasered because of 2 factors. A, he was splitting his materials, basically standing still without any protection against the side that he doesn't have any vision on them. B, his crosshair placement was kind of off, so he wasn't able to block the shot off. And we see that he built a wall, first of all, to the side instead of towards the direction. That made it compromised him, and that could cost him to get knocked, realistically. And 3, he was looking in the direction behind, towards the agency. He should be comming that he is looking at the agency. So his teammate goes and looks at the mountain, right? Because that whole mountain area is an area that can shoot at them constantly, that whole entire area. And his team is not even batting an eye towards him. His teammate should have spotted him and calmed that, and therefore he wouldn't have taken as much damage. His teammate should be looking behind and to the left, whilst he looks in front and to the right. It's about covering areas where people can have a line of sight to you, and also covering areas where you have a line of sight on people, and people may not have a line of sight on you. Right? So they already got shot from behind, so it's fine if they don't look behind, but that whole mountain range makes you so vulnerable if you don't actually look after it. And what happened was that they got punished. There's so many points on the mountain where you can get shot from and they can just run away without getting tagged back. And that's what compromises him, right? That man wasn't even on that much elevation, he just got lasered. And so he kind of panic builds, he switches to hard material, which is the correct decision to make. And because he has white heals, he's lucky that he can actually even get back up. I'm not sure about the use of a flopper so early on. He does have 3 medkits, but you know, he's lucky to be alive. We fast forward a bit to the end game of this game. This is half and half out. They don't pull half and half out. They end up getting a launch pad and a kill off of a grenade. And what happens here that does disturb me quite a bit is that since half and half out pulls, they don't pay any attention to it. They haven't actually acknowledged half and half out where it pulls. They don't actually check whether they can go on an on-foot rotate or anything as such. And instead, they just tunnel vision on the opportunities that may be around them. You see it just peeking out of that cone alone would give them so much vision. They could have white lined it, but they wouldn't know that because they're so encapsulated in just trying to get, you know, potential kills on edge zone and then padding. So that pad has made them lazier as players, and they haven't actually given much thought. You see, he just gives a tiny bit of thought. He doesn't even look in front of him straight west. and you see they just go over the pad. And what happens with this pad is that they set up edge zone, and they do manage to get some picks because they immediately look back at the people who don't have tags, who don't have launches, I mean, and they can get some good tags on them, right? And this is the beauty of it. But if they took that rotation early on instead of focusing on unnecessary stuff, they might have actually made us rotate, use some materials, but have a launch pad to spare. But those tags are really, really easy when you're looking back out into zone instead of into the safer area, right? But lots of people will be set up on that edge zone now. You've got to acknowledge the pros and cons of your positioning, but everybody rotating it, that's when you capitalize. If you have a launch pad and you pad early, that's one of the incentives of padding early in the first place. We fast forward to the late game. They're playing low ground right now with low amount of materials. So you really need to look for an impact elimination. KoinKoin is responsible for pathing. I put this at 50% speed to show you something, right? So here's an impact elimination that you really need. And instead of getting that impact elimination, what happens is that he has no piece control. He doesn't take the cone above him. He doesn't take the two walls next to him. And then he looks at this useless launch pad right next to him. And so if we characterize that ball to the right is a launch pad, and that's the player just now. He could have hit that player or boxed that player in, get that impact elimination, get that refresh. Instead, he does nothing, just goes away. That player can completely hit him, griep his full game in terms of health, put him at such a disadvantage, or maybe even just one tag and kill him because of his bad piece control. But both seem to have boomer reactions, and that's why he manages to get away with it. But if you look at its materials, that would have completely changed his game. You see, just 50, 50, 50 plus to every single one will change that. They can't make that rotation. If you look at the zone, they can't make that rotation realistically with his materials right now. He doesn't have any utilities to make up for it. He doesn't have floppers anymore. He doesn't have a bandy bazooka. And that means that he has to get an impact frag, and he just gave up on that opportunity. What happens later on is that they ramp tunnel. His teammate was a ton of maths by placing those floors right now, kind of random floors. And what happens is because he's on low ground, he needs to immediately look up, right? He needs to look up. Say you're on mid ground, right? You're ramp tunneling. Same scenario, you're mid ground instead. You can look low. You can look on the same layer. But when you're on low ground, there are only two ways to look. That's around you, clearing out your layer, clearing out your low ground, and that's above you, right? And what they need to do right now is to look above, which he just doesn't do. He ignores that. There could be somebody right on top of him, but his awareness doesn't allow him to realize that, and he doesn't open up. He continues with that rotate. His teammate doesn't give him how many materials he has remaining, which is pretty crucial information to how they should play out the rest of the game. And then later on they get cut off on this rotate because of a slight stagger, and he gets slightly too greedy, and he gets knocked down. He only has 4 builds, and he ends up dying to a minigun because of his greed, but also because of panicking and him not thinking enough. If we watch this whole sequence back, right, there's a good ramp and a bit in between him and his duo. And what that allows for him to do is that he can actually catch people like this player on the side off guard, right? He could have killed this player, but instead he cracks him for shield. He gets greedy, he shoots a shot off to nowhere. Realistically, what he should do now, because of his low materials, which he should know, and because of him wanting to stick to his teammate, he should literally walk in, break that wall, which is on quite light health. He can literally see through that metal wall, and he should just continue on with his teammate. But instead, what he doesn't do is what I just said. He goes out, that's 1 material, he has 3 builds left, that was completely unnecessary, and then he builds in once again instead of walking like a normal person into the tunnel. This is quite a small mistake, but this costed him, because people below and above you recognize new builds, and they will pressure these builds because they can see you through it, so they can track you, but they can also tell that you may be caught off guard by it. So instead of going that normal direction, he doesn't, and that compromises his game and his teammates' game. If we fast forward a bit, we see his team is now playing solo because, as we saw just now, he just got minigun to death. He played a flopper, right? And right now he needs an impact elimination because of his health. He has 270 wood, so he shouldn't be playing like he has completely no mass. What he should do was, because he jumped down, he caught this player off guard. That player is looking at another knock play on the floor. He should cone him. He should demonstrate good piece control by taking the walls around him, and that player is completely completely clueless. If he does this edit right now, he hits that player at least once, right? He'll get one tag off at the least, and you'll probably even get 2 tags off before the player actually manages to trade back at least some damage. And what that means is that he'll potentially get a siphon, and then he'll get at least plus 50, 50, 50 times 2, right? So 300 materials can completely change his game up, because you see 300 materials at this late a circle means that he gets so much extra time for survival. But he plays 2 passive, he goes in the zone and just gets hit by another player on the back who manages to drop on him because he's not basing up enough, right? That extra cone, that extra wall, that extra ramp, that extra floor is so important to his gameplay, which he wasn't focusing on, which means that he died because of bad piece control and bad tunneling into zone when he had the materials necessary for it. Anyways, guys, that wraps it up for today's VOD review. I hope you did enjoy the VOD review today and learn a thing or two, whether to do for yourself and to implement into your gameplay, or a thing that you found that you were doing that you don't want to do in the future. Make sure that you subscribe and like the video if you actually enjoyed it, and make sure to share on your social media if you feel that the information is worth spreading around. Make sure you go follow my Twitter, the link is in the bio, and make sure to come back next week for part 3 and part 4 of the series, where we will cover week 2 of FNCS Duos. By then we will have crowned 7 new champions. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video and have a great FNCS weekend. Best of RNGs to you guys.